At first, nobody noticed the ships. They appeared high above the Pacific, just black wedges gliding soundlessly through the clouds, shimmering faintly as if reality itself was trying to decide whether to acknowledge them. Satellites saw them. Fighter jets scrambled. The usual panic rippled across social media. But it wasn't a surprise. Humanity had been half expecting visitors since they'd learned to bounce radio signals off the moon. The surprise was how bored the visitors seemed. They called themselves the Vesh, and their arrival broadcast was sterile and efficient. We have arrived to catalog your species and integrate you into the galactic logical network. Your response is unnecessary, as this process is deterministic. Compliance is optimal. Irregularities will be corrected. Then their delegation landed on the White House lawn, a single, shimmering black pillar flanked by 8 floating drones that projected a geometric figure in midair. It looked vaguely humanoid. 2 vertical shafts for legs, a branching cascade of transparent triangles for arms. But its voice was flat and mechanical. "We will now begin assessment," it announced to the gathered officials and reporters. That was the first mistake, because standing at the very back of the crowd, where Secret Service had failed to notice him, was Eli Torres, junior IT technician, serial prankster, and the kind of guy who wore socks with flamingos on them to job interviews. Eli hadn't meant to be there. He'd been delivering routers to a contractor's office when a motorcade blocked the road, and in the ensuing confusion, he somehow slipped through the barricade. Now, pressed up against a fence, he watched the glittering figure with mild curiosity and a rising urge to mess with it. The figure's opening speech continued. Humanity displays baseline carbon-based sentience and employs primitive computation and governance. You will now be indexed according to your logical processing capabilities. Submit your core doctrines for validation. A Marine general stepped forward with a carefully worded statement about sovereignty and dialogue, but the Vesh ignored him entirely. Instead, its drones began to glow, projecting strange symbols and waves of light that, it claimed, would harmonize Earth's data systems with the galactic logical network. That's when Eli noticed the drones weren't just floating, they were also scanning the crowd. More specifically, his phone. A notification popped up. VeshCorp/interface detected. Initializing synchronization. All inputs will be logically corrected. The phone screen began flashing with alien glyphs, and a progress bar labeled Error Reconciliation crawled across the bottom. Eli, half in shock, half amused, whispered, "Well, that's not creepy at all," and, on reflex, opened his notes app and typed. The statement below is false. The statement above is true. And he hit send all. The Vesh drones stopped moving. Not a dramatic stop, just a little twitch, a little hesitation, as though their internal clocks missed a beat. The pillar figure tilted its head, which caused an odd flicker of fractured triangles across its body. Then it spoke. Contradictory data detected. Query. Identify origin of input. Nobody else seemed to notice anything amiss, but Eli grinned and typed another line. "I'm lying right now, but that means I'm telling the truth, which means I'm lying, which means..." The nearest drone let out a faint pop, like a light bulb blowing, and slowly descended to the grass. Eli pocketed his phone. The next day, headlines read, "Alien delegates malfunction mid-presentation. VeshCorp halts logic interface, cites human anomaly. Hero Marine claims he stared them down." But was it enough? Eli just went back to work. But the Vesh didn't. That evening, 3 black drones appeared outside his apartment window, hovering silently. He was trying to make ramen while streaming cat videos when the glass door glowed blue and a single line of text appeared across it. "Human unit, Eli Torres. You have been flagged as a source of critical errors." Eli nearly dropped his bowl. "Me? You will submit your doctrines for correction. Resistance is irrational." He put the bowl down and walked up to the window. "You guys, you're serious? You can't handle a little logical loop?" The drones flickered. "Clarify. Little logical loop." Eli snorted and scrawled on a sticky note. "This sentence is false." He pressed it against the glass. The drones froze midair. Their lights turned red, then white, then nothing. A faint keening sound, not quite mechanical, not quite alive, came from them before they zipped away in a frenzy. He was still laughing when his phone rang. "Mr. Torres? This is the Department of Defense. We'd like to speak with you about an incident." The next morning, they flew him to a secure base outside Cheyenne Mountain. A panel of grim-looking officials, generals, scientists, and one very tired-looking woman in a business suit were waiting for him. A giant screen behind them showed frozen images of Vesh ships hanging above several major cities. "Mr. Torres," the general began, "are you aware that the aliens you interfered with operate entirely on something called a logical neural interface?" Eli blinked. "Like a computer? Not just a computer. Their perception of reality itself is an endless series of logical progressions, a tree of if/then statements. Their ships, their weapons, their entire civilization runs on this." The scientist chimed in, "And it seems, based on the input you provided, that they cannot tolerate illogical constructs. You crash them." Eli leaned back. "Oh." The woman in the suit leaned forward, narrowing her eyes. "We've been at a diplomatic stalemate with them for 24 hours. We suspect they're attempting to recover from the paradoxes you introduced, and we expect them to return very, very soon." She slid a piece of paper across the table. "We want you to write down everything you sent to them. Every contradiction, every paradox, every joke." Eli picked up the paper and grinned faintly. "Ma'am, you're asking the wrong question." The general raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what would the right question be, son?" Eli leaned forward, smirking. "How many more of these do you want?" For a moment, the room was silent. Then, reluctantly, the scientist actually chuckled. "As many as you can come up with." Later that evening, back in his room at the base, Eli sat cross-legged on his bed, a whiteboard balanced on his knees and a marker between his teeth. On the table next to him was a box labeled Earth Defense Initiative, Logic Disruption Division. He scrawled at the top of the board, Operation Neural Recoil, and underneath it, he began jotting down ideas. Schrodinger's pizza, both delivered and eaten. A circle with corners. A flag that says, "This statement is false." The sound of one hand clapping. A video titled, "Click here if you don't want to click here." He grinned to himself as he wrote, the faint hum of alien drones still audible somewhere high above. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't the underdog because of their weaknesses, but because of their unpredictability. And Eli couldn't wait to see how far he could push it. It didn't take the Vesh long to recover. Just 48 hours after Eli Torres sent them into their first philosophical tailspin, their ships, once frozen above Earth's skies, began to stir. One by one, the black wedges of their fleet flickered back to life, rising higher, realigning into neat, precise formations. The massive command ship over Washington, D.C. sent a single chilling broadcast. Anomaly noted. Protocol adapted. Human error will be corrected. The Defense Council met immediately. The general who'd recruited Eli thumped the table so hard his coffee spilled. "They're coming. The Vesh don't ask for things twice. They're mobilizing to sterilize whatever they can't reconcile." In the corner of the room, Eli leaned back in his chair, munching on a bag of pretzels. "You know," he drawled between bites, "you guys keep saying correct the error like I'm the error. Maybe I'm the patch they didn't know they needed." Nobody laughed. That night, the skies burned. Vesh drones descended over New York, London, Tokyo, and Johannesburg. Their black wedges sliced silently through skyscrapers, spraying precision light that turned steel into dust. Entire streets of people froze as the air thickened with alien interference, what the Pentagon called a logic fog. Computers crashed. Traffic lights blinked out. Anyone caught in the fog collapsed mid-stride, clutching their heads and screaming. By dawn, the aliens had seized key population centers, erected containment fields, and broadcast a single stark message to every human device, screen, and surface they could reach. Compliance is mandatory. Your irrationality is terminated. That's when Eli got his first official briefing. They called it the first Recoil. An entire alien battalion, drones, walkers, and 3 logic-shielded command units, was advancing through Colorado Springs when Eli arrived. The area was eerily quiet, the streets littered with abandoned cars and toppled streetlights, the air shimmering with faint, silver ripples. A young soldier handed Eli a comms tablet. "Sir," she said, eyeing him skeptically, "the general said you'd know what to do." Eli squinted at the tablet. The screen showed a grainy satellite feed of the battalion moving through the city, their geometric bodies clicking and folding like origami as they swept forward. At their center hovered a strange, gleaming cube, the cognitive core, the Vesh nexus for coordinating ground assaults. Eli cracked his knuckles. "Well then," he muttered, "let's see if they like a little jazz." He set the tablet down, pulled out a marker, and scribbled on the whiteboard he'd brought. "The following statement is false. The next statement is true. The previous statement was false." Then he added, "Divide by 0, and, just for good measure, why is a raven like a writing desk? Broadcast this on every frequency they're listening to," he ordered. The soldier blinked. That's it, Eli said, already pulling a pack of gum from his pocket. The moment the broadcast went out, the effects were immediate. The battalion slowed. At first, it was subtle. Their drones faltered mid-step, then corrected themselves. The cube began to spin faster, the silver light around it flashing erratically. Then came the sound Eli had started calling the keening, a rising, metallic wail as the logic trees inside the Vesh began to collapse under contradictory inputs. The walkers froze entirely, their limbs locked at impossible angles, and some simply folded in on themselves like crushed soda cans. A dozen drones hovered briefly in midair before dropping like stones into the street. And the cube? The cube emitted a long, low tone before the surface of it cracked, light bleeding out in jagged lines, and imploded into itself with a sudden flash of silent white. The humans watching from the edge of the city erupted into cheers. But the Vesh weren't done yet. From above, a second wave descended, this time carrying shimmering shields and what looked like black ribbons of flowing light around their forms. As soon as they hit the ground, they extended glowing arrays from their bodies, creating tight-knit protective shells around the remaining drones. Eli grimaced. They've got air buffers now." The general's voice barked through the comms. "Mr. Torres, whatever you did, do it again." "They're regrouping." Eli sucked thoughtfully on his gum. "They adapted to logical paradoxes," he muttered. "Fine. Let's see how they handle nonsense." He grabbed the whiteboard again and scribbled furiously. "Banana the infinite purple monkey dishwasher. If a tree falls in the forest, but the forest is actually a metaphor for corporate tax law, does the moon weep? This sentence has cabbage." He handed the tablet back to the soldier. "Send this. With pictures. Make sure they see it." The soldier stared. "Pictures?" Eli nodded. "Specifically this one," he said, flipping open his phone and showing her a meme. A stock photo of a confused-looking cat sitting on a Roomba with the caption, "Behold, the Lord of Chaos." The broadcast hit the airwaves just as the second wave finished setting up their shields. For a second, nothing happened. Then the shields began to flicker. Not fail, not yet, but pulse. Irregularly, as though the Vesh inside were trying to process what they were seeing and failing to categorize it properly. The keening started again, sharper this time. One drone exploded outright. 2 more slowly rotated upside down before slamming into the ground and embedding themselves nose first. The walkers' movements devolved into erratic lurches, and the air began to shimmer violently as their logic fog fractured into weird, spiraling eddies. Eli allowed himself a satisfied grin. "Irrationality beats inevitability," he muttered. By sunset, the battalion was gone. The few Vesh that hadn't self-imploded retreated into the sky, their ships visibly staggering in their formations. A message arrived on every screen shortly after. Anomaly escalating. Human behavior cannot be resolved. Further study required. Temporary withdrawal initiated. Across the planet, similar reports came in. In London, a poet had stood on a rooftop shouting nonsense at the drones, and they'd scattered. In Tokyo, pranksters projected animated penguins dancing on giant billboards, and sent an entire fleet spiraling into the bay. By the time Eli returned to base, the general met him at the gate with a grin and a handshake. "Well done, son," the general said. "We've bought ourselves some time." Eli just shrugged, leaning back on the hood of a Jeep. "Oh, this was just round one." The general frowned. "They'll adapt again." Eli's grin widened. "Good," he said. "That's when it gets fun." That night, alone in his quarters, Eli sat down at his desk and began writing. On the wall, he taped a new sheet of paper. At the top, in big block letters, it read, "Operation Neural Recoil, Phase 2. And underneath it, Schrodinger's banana. The ship of Theseus, but with tacos. Infinite monkeys typing recipes. A square circle wearing a hat. Duck season / rabbit season loop. If God is omnipotent, can he microwave a burrito so hot he can't eat it?" He stared at the list for a long moment, then nodded to himself, scribbling more. Above the base, high in orbit, the Vesh ships hovered in silence, their lights flickering as though already dreading what humanity might throw at them next. It started like a thunderstorm. A faint tremor ran through the earth as the Vesh returned. Not a single fleet this time, but dozens black wedges blotting out the stars. Their arrival cracked the sky open with lightning-bright streaks of alien energy as reality itself seemed to groan under their presence. News outlets were still running footage of the last recoil when the updated broadcast came through, stamped on every screen, every device, even blinking across highway billboards in that cold, inhuman font. Anomaly persistent. Strategy escalated. Logical purge initiated. Compliance is final. Beneath the message, a countdown appeared. 72 hours. Eli Torres stood at the edge of a makeshift operations center inside Cheyenne Mountain, arms crossed, chewing on his lip. On the giant screen in front of him, dozens of alien fleets descended over every major continent, each dragging behind it a shimmering cloud of the so-called logic fog. But something about them was different this time. "They're moving slower," he murmured. The general glanced over. "Slower?" "Yeah," Eli said, gesturing at the footage. "They're being careful, like they don't trust the ground they're walking on." The scientist who had been tracking the alien patterns nodded grimly. "They've deployed something we haven't seen before. Logic barriers. Self-correcting fields to buffer against paradoxes." Eli squinted at the data streaming across the screen. Lattices of glowing alien script spiraling around the advancing battalions. He could almost feel the over-engineered arrogance radiating off them. He grinned. "Good," he said. "Means they're scared." The next 24 hours were chaos. Across the world, the Vesh began tearing through resistance, their barriers holding against the most obvious contradictions and nonsense tactics. Teams of pranksters sent out conflicting signals and riddles. But now the alien units simply stopped, froze for a moment, then powered through, unaffected. By the second day, the streets of New York were lined with silent drones maintaining perfect formations as they herded civilians into containment zones. In Paris, the Eiffel Tower gleamed under alien lights, while Vesh walkers moved mechanically through the city. At first glance, it looked like humanity's absurd little edge was gone. But Eli didn't see it that way. In a newly established Illogic Core command room, he stood in front of his now legendary whiteboard. The edges were stained with dry erase ink, and half a dozen nervous analysts hovered nearby. "Here's the problem," he said, drawing a jagged line across the board. "We've been thinking too linear, too cute. Riddles and paradoxes are great, but these guys learn fast. They patch holes." He jabbed at the line with his marker. "We don't poke holes. We collapse the whole tree." One analyst frowned. "How?" Eli grinned. "Jazz." On the morning of the final countdown, humanity launched its counteroffensive. From Washington to Seoul, massive speakers and holographic projectors rose on rooftops, on trucks, even on tethered drones. Under Eli's direction, humans began broadcasting what he called the Recoil Symphony, an improvised storm of visual and auditory nonsense that no single logic tree could predict or contain. It wasn't just paradoxes anymore. It was random snippets of Shakespeare read backward, layered over jazz, drumming, and fractal kaleidoscope projections. It was toddlers in dinosaur costumes charging Vesh lines while chanting up is down, down is up. It was random arithmetic equations painted in fluorescent colors that equaled fish. It was a man juggling bananas while reciting stock prices of companies that didn't exist. At first, the Vesh battalions simply braced, their shields flickering faintly. But as the onslaught continued, the effects deepened. One drone veered wildly to the left and embedded itself in the side of a building. Another began circling a lamppost, as though trying to calculate its circumference forever. A walker stopped mid-step, its limbs twitching violently before it simply lay down and refused to move. And the cognitive cores, those ominous black cubes that coordinated entire fleets, began to hum, then crack, then melt into shimmering puddles of illogic. By noon, Eli himself was on the front lines in Times Square. He stood atop an armored truck, megaphone in one hand, a piece of chalk in the other, as he scrawled nonsense equations on the side of the vehicle. Around him, soldiers and civilians danced, shouted, and laughed in chaotic unison, throwing the full absurdity of the human spirit at the invaders. When the lead Vesh unit finally arrived, a towering, spindly figure with fractal arms and a logic barrier shimmering bright around it, Eli didn't flinch. He stepped forward and shouted into the megaphone, "If you try to fail and succeed, which did you do?" The figure paused mid-step. Eli continued, circling it now, his grin wicked. "Define the sound of one hand clapping. Explain why a hot dog isn't a sandwich. Tell me why you park on a driveway and drive on a parkway." The logic barrier flickered violently. Eli knelt, pulled a small rubber chicken from his backpack, and set it gently at the figure's feet. "This," he announced, "is your god now." The figure screamed, a strange, discordant noise, and fell to its knees. The barrier shattered, arcs of alien light sprang outward as the unit convulsed and collapsed. That was the turning point. Across the globe, reports came in of Vesh lines breaking, their units collapsing under the sheer unpredictability of humanity's onslaught. In Moscow, pranksters staged an opera featuring giant inflatable ducks. In Nairobi, kids released thousands of balloons painted with surreal slogans into the logic fog. In Sydney, someone hacked into the alien broadcast and played endless loops of a man trying to bite his own ear. The Recoil war was no longer just a defensive measure. It became an offensive. Humanity pushed back. At midnight, the largest cognitive nexus yet, a ship so vast it blackened the stars over the Atlantic, descended to resolve the anomaly directly. Its broadcast boomed across every frequency, resonating through buildings and bones alike. Final correction initiated. The anomaly will be purged. Eli climbed onto a platform on the deck of an aircraft carrier beneath the looming alien craft, holding a wireless microphone. Behind him, the largest holographic array yet had been assembled. "All right, big guy," he muttered, looking up at the massive nexus. "Let's see how much you can take." He signaled the technicians. The holograms flared to life, a riot of impossible shapes and colors, an orchestra of recursive music that never repeated, a swarm of contradictory headlines scrolling in every direction. Eli grabbed the mic and began reciting absurdist poetry at the sky. "Roses are red, violets are blue. This statement is false, and so are you." He ripped a rubber duck out of his pocket and hurled it skyward as the crowd erupted into cheers. The nexus shuddered. Fissures of white light ran across its black hull. It let out a bone-rattling shriek, and then it cracked open, exploding into a maelstrom of cascading fragments that fell harmlessly into the ocean. The cheering went on for hours. When the dust finally settled and the last Vesh ships limped away into the night, Earth's battered cities erupted with laughter and applause. Screens everywhere displayed the same new message from the retreating aliens. Anomaly irreconcilable. Humanity indeterminate. Further engagement not advised. The Recoil war was over. Eli, standing at the center of Times Square amid the confetti and the roar of victory, was hoisted onto the shoulders of soldiers and civilians alike. Someone shoved a microphone into his hand. "What do you call what just happened?" The reporter shouted above the din. Eli thought about it for a second. Then he grinned. "Jazz," he said. "You just gotta feel it." The crowd went wild. That night, back in his quarters, Eli taped a fresh sheet of paper on his wall. At the top, in big letters, he wrote, "Operation Shattered Trees, Phase 4. And beneath it, ducks again but bigger. Infinite hall of mirrors with only one mirror. Schrodinger's burrito. Synchronized swimming in space. Explain love using only math. Why is a raven like a writing desk?" Finale. He sat back, hands behind his head, and smiled at the stars. Somewhere up there, the Vesh were already dreading humanity's next move. It was quiet after the Recoil War. For weeks, the skies were clear. The black Vesh ships that had once blotted out the stars were gone, their shattered drones littering city streets like strange, dead insects. Governments hastily declared a kind of fragile victory. Cities lit up again. The news ran endless footage of people dancing in the streets. But Eli Torres knew better. He knew they weren't done. It started on a Monday. At precisely noon Greenwich Mean Time, the sun went dark, not from an eclipse, but from something far larger. A vast, lattice-like construct unfolded in orbit, its black panels stretching across the sky like a spider's web. The galactic nexus had arrived. It wasn't a ship this time. It was everything, a full-grown tree of pure logic, grown into the fabric of reality itself. And its message rang out, deep, resonant not just in words but in thought pulsing in the back of every human mind. You have been weighed. You have been measured. You have been found. Incorrect. The tree will be reset. Resistance will be unthought. People froze in the streets. Planes fell from the sky. Entire networks blinked out. Eli stood in the middle of Times Square, looking up at the impossible geometry unfolding above. "Oh, hell," he muttered, pulling out his marker. "That thing's big." In the underground Illogic Core Command Center, hastily rebuilt after the last assault, the atmosphere was tense. Eli stood in front of his battered whiteboard, glaring at the diagrams being projected. "They're not just sending ships anymore," the general said grimly. "They're rewriting the laws of cause and effect around us. They've turned our own reality into a logic tree." The scientist nodded, pointing to the lattice on the screen. "Every possibility we could exploit before is already accounted for now. Every joke, every contradiction, every nonsense pattern, they've grown barriers against them. They've learned." Eli chewed the cap of his marker thoughtfully. "Nah, they haven't learned. They're just thinking bigger. But bigger just means taller trees." He turned back to the board and scrawled in big, blocky letters. "Cut the root." Phase 4 began that night. Eli led a team of pranksters, poets, children, stand-up comics, and one very confused mime into the heart of the Vesh nexus, through what was left of their orbital blockade, using ships covered in painted riddles and wrapped in paradox loops. The nexus itself wasn't a place so much as an idea manifested in alien metal and light. The closer they got, the more wrong everything felt, as though reality was trying to talk them out of existing. Eli's breath fogged the glass of his helmet as he floated down the final corridor, carrying nothing but his marker and a single, crumpled rubber chicken. "Status?" The general's voice crackled in his earpiece. Eli grinned, about to turn their family tree into firewood. At the center of the nexus was the root, a pulsing, crystalline trunk of pure logical energy. It throbbed with impossible patterns, spiraling equations, and fractal designs stretching out into the void. The air around it shimmered with heat and static, the weight of its perfect order crushing every stray thought that came too close. Eli drifted to the platform at its base and stood there, staring up at it for a long moment. "You're beautiful," he said softly, "but you think too much." He reached into his pocket, pulled out his marker, and began to write. Not on a screen, not on paper, on the root itself. If the root contains all truths, and this sentence is a lie, then what are you? The crystal flared. If cutting the root destroys the tree, but the tree defines the root, who dies first? The air cracked. Eli pressed the rubber chicken against the glowing surface. Behold, Lord of Chaos. The root began to hum. Not the orderly, soothing hum of before, but a deep, rattling growl that shook the entire nexus. The Vesh appeared. Not drones this time. Not walkers. Them. They unfolded from the walls and ceiling, great impossible shapes of angles and light, faceless yet watching. Their voices boomed inside his skull. What are you? Why do you persist? How do you breach the tree? Eli looked up at them and grinned. Because I'm not a tree, he said. I'm a forest. He scrawled the last sentence on the root, pressing the marker until it snapped. If you finish reading this sentence, you must forget how it started. The Vesh screamed. It wasn't sound. Not really, but it ripped through the nexus like a storm. Cracks spread through the root. The crystal splintered, its perfect branches twisting in on themselves, collapsing under contradictions they could not resolve. The lattice above Earth flickered wildly. On the surface, people watched as the dark web in the sky fractured into a billion shards of light. Back on the platform, Eli watched the root dissolve into dust. The Vesh shapes flickered and fell silent, their presence evaporating into the air. Above him, the tree shattered completely, raining harmless motes of light down through the atmosphere like shooting stars. Eli leaned against the railing, catching his breath. "Good night, sweet princes," he muttered. Then he pulled a small flask from his jacket and toasted the stars. When he returned to Earth, the world was already celebrating. Cities glowed with fireworks. Children ran through the streets, holding balloons painted with nonsense phrases and riddles. People wore rubber chicken masks and waved banners that read, "Unthink this." The general met him at the base of the ramp, shaking his head in disbelief. "You really did it, Torres," he said. "You brought the whole damn thing down." Eli smirked. "That wasn't me. That was all of us. The whole messy, nonsensical, beautiful species." The general clapped him on the shoulder. "Well, son, if there's anything left of them out there, I bet they'll think twice before trying this again." Eli looked up at the sky, where faint streaks of the shattered tree still glimmered. "Let him think," he said. "We'll keep feeling." Later that night, alone in his apartment, Eli sat at his kitchen table with a fresh sheet of paper. At the top, in big letters, he wrote, "Operation, the Irrational Empire, Phase 5. And beneath it, Schrodinger's Burrito Redux, Rubber Ducks in Zero Gravity, Infinite Library of Unwritten Books, a song with no end, no beginning, a flag that reads, both sides up." He grinned faintly to himself, tapping the marker against his chin. Somewhere out there, beyond the wreckage of the Nexus, he knew they were still watching, and they were afraid, not as jokes, but of the simple, terrifying truth that humanity didn't need to make sense and never would. The stars had never looked so quiet. It had been 6 months since the shattered trees fell. 6 months since Eli Torres walked into the heart of the Vesh Nexus and scribbled humanity's irreverent signature on their perfect, crystalline logic. 6 months since the Vesh stopped fighting. But they didn't leave. At first, everyone assumed they were gone, slinking back to some distant corner of the galaxy, nursing their wounded dignity. But the black ships still hovered at the edge of the solar system, just outside Jupiter's orbit, silent and still. Waiting. For what? Nobody knew. Eli wasn't waiting. He was building. The newly formed Galactic Anomaly Council, now headquartered in Geneva, had officially given humanity dominion over the problem of interfacing with the Vesh. Since no one else dared approach the broken aliens anymore, Earth was now recognized, reluctantly at first, as the galaxy's leading authority on a logic management. The rest of the galaxy, it seemed, didn't know how to cope with the Vesh after their collapse. The Vesh had spent millions of years perfecting their logic trees, colonizing worlds, and rewriting entire biospheres to fit their structure of thought. But when their trees shattered under humanity's paradoxes, their ships froze. Their drones shut down. Their soldiers crumpled into quiet heaps. Yet they didn't die. They simply stopped and stared at Earth, at Eli. It was a clear spring morning when they finally reached out. One of their ships, a great wedge of black stone and glass, still cracked from its fall, drifted into lunar orbit. Eli was woken at 4 a.m. by the urgent buzz of his phone. On the screen was a single message. Anomaly Prime. Request. Teach. He rubbed his eyes and laughed. Well, he murmured, better late than never. The first delegation landed in Central Park. Hundreds gathered to watch as the shimmering pillars of light formed again, and the Vesh appeared. Less imposing now, their triangular arms dimmer, their once glorious barriers flickering faintly like broken neon signs. Eli stood before them wearing jeans, a hoodie, and a ball cap that read Lord of Chaos. One of the Vesh stepped forward. Its voice was quieter now, almost hesitant. Human, how do you exist? How do you continue? After shattering the tree, Eli grinned. Oh, that's easy. We never grew a tree. We're weeds. You can't uproot us. The Vesh tilted their angular heads. We do not understand, but we wish to. Eli's smirk faded, replaced with something more thoughtful. All right, he said finally. Class is in session. And so, humanity's strangest chapter began. They called it the Irrational Empire, though no one wore crowns or sat on thrones. It wasn't an empire of force or territory. It was an empire of ideas. Across the galaxy, emissaries came to Earth, cautious at first, but increasingly curious, to study the strange humans who had defeated the mighty Vesh with nothing more than nonsense and stubbornness. In Nairobi, Vesh drones attended comedy clubs, recording every joke and groan-worthy pun they could process. In Tokyo, alien scholars sat in Zen gardens, attempting to unravel koans and coming apart at the seams. In Rio, a dozen crystalline dignitaries danced awkwardly at carnival, draped in feathers and glitter, trying to make sense of the rhythm. And above it all, in orbit, Earth's first interstellar university floated, the School of Unreason, where Eli taught Advanced Paradoxology 201, improvised jazz warfare, and the ever-popular seminar. If you're reading this, you've already failed. The students came by the hundreds. And not just Vesh. The Kalshur, with their flawless probability engines, sent their brightest minds to learn how to fail spectacularly. The Eterians, who spoke only in perfect equations, attended poetry readings and wept openly. The Voch, who had spent eons refining their culture into a single beautiful algorithm, collapsed into joyful chaos after their first exposure to children's finger-painting day. And everywhere, the humans laughed and taught and danced, showing the galaxy what it meant to embrace contradiction, to cherish absurdity, to be beautifully and fundamentally flawed. But not everyone was happy. Some feared what humanity had become, not because of what they had done to the Vesh, but because of what they might yet do. One night, deep in the heart of the new university, Eli found himself sitting alone in a dim lecture hall, nursing a cup of coffee as he stared at the stars outside. The general, retired now, but still looming like a storm, came and sat beside him. You've changed things, the old man said quietly. Eli chuckled. We changed things. I just held the pen. The general shook his head. You've got the galaxy eating out of your hand, and they don't even know they're the punchline. Eli smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. That's the thing about jokes, he said softly. They're funnier when you're in on it. At dawn, the Vesh returned again. Their shattered ships floated down over the Hudson River. This time, they carried no shields, no drones, only gifts. They came to Eli and knelt, or at least they folded themselves into something like kneeling and offered him a single, delicate branch of their fallen logic tree. He took it gently, turning it over in his hands. It was cracked and faintly glowing, but still beautiful. Human, we cannot be what you are, but we will be something else. Eli met their gaze, or what passed for it, and smiled. You don't have to be like us, he said. You just have to stop being afraid of yourselves. And so it was. The Vesh began to change, slowly, clumsily, but irrevocably. Their perfect geometry softened. Their drones painted themselves in wild colors. Their ships began to hum with strange, improvised tunes. They learned to laugh. They learned to dance. They learned to dream. And humanity, chaotic, messy, impossible humanity became the quiet center of a galaxy that had once believed only in order. Years later, Eli stood on a balcony overlooking the campus of the School of Unreason, watching as alien children and human children raced through the halls, shouting riddles at each other and collapsing into giggles. He held the cracked branch of the logic tree in one hand, a fresh marker in the other. Behind him, a journalist hovered nervously, waiting. So, she finally asked, "What do you call what you've built here?" Eli thought for a moment, then scrawled on the wall beside him. "We called it the Irrational Empire, but it's really just home." That night, as the lights of New York sparkled below and the fractured stars shimmered above, Eli sat at his desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. At the top, he wrote, "Operation, further instructions, TBD," and underneath, "Infinite jest, quantum limericks, ducks in tuxedos, mandatory, Schrodinger's burrito, again, explain why love exists in mime." He leaned back, staring at the paper for a long time before adding one last line at the bottom. "The joke's only over when we stop laughing." He grinned and closed his eyes. Somewhere out there, among the stars, a dozen alien civilizations were learning to laugh with him. And for the first time in its long, illogical history, humanity didn't feel alone.